What if the biggest changes coming to classrooms aren't being decided in schools at all, but at tech conferences most educators never attend? Now, how many education tools have you seen that promise some type of innovation, but quietly ignored how students actually learn? And what happens when technology reshapes learning faster than educators are invited into the conversation? You have now joined the Education Evolution, and you're listening to Tech Evolution. This is a podcast for the thinkers, the doers, and those who know the most important lessons aren't always learned in school. Whether this is your first time tuning in or you've been here before, welcome. You didn't press play by accident, or maybe you did, but you're here now, and I'm glad about it. I'm Hadi Ha, but you can call me Mr. Jihad, and today's episode of Tech Evolution is about how technology is shaping learning in real time, often before classrooms are even ready for it. But before we get into that, I got something to tell you. We have a goal of reaching 600 YouTube subscribers by the end of this month. So how can you help us reach our goal? You can do so by subscribing or sharing it with someone who cares about learning and where it's headed. Today, we're talking about CES 2026, the Consumer Electronics Show, just in case you didn't know what CES meant. Now, CES isn't an education conference by any means at all, but as a former special education teacher, and I'll even say a tech enthusiast, as well as someone who will always be an educator at heart, I've learned this. The classroom feels the impact of technology long before schools are ready for it. So let's talk about what CES was revealing this year about education tools and what actually belongs in classrooms and what doesn't. One of the biggest shifts coming out of CES is how AI is being framed in learning spaces. Not as a search engine, so thinking about Ask Jeeves or Google, not as a shortcut, but as something closer to a learning partner. Several platforms this year showcase conversational adaptive AI systems that are designed to engage learners through dialogue instead of that one-way instruction that we're all used to. Here's what that actually looks like. So instead of a student watching a lesson once and moving on, the tool can ask, do you want that explained in a different way? Or can you show me how you're thinking about this? And then adjust based on the student's response. Y'all, this is a major development and this shift matters. And it caught my attention specifically as a former special education teacher because in real classrooms, the biggest limitation isn't effort. It's time to re-explain them directions. You done said it about 1,000 times. Time to scaffold differently and differentiate content. Time to slow things down without spotlighting a student. And time to check for that understanding when it didn't click the first or the fifth time. An AI that can calmly repeat instructions and help rephrase concepts and let students move at their own pace without judgment. That is a development that can actually help students. That's not replacing educators. That's instructional reinforcement. And that reinforcement matters because the goal has never been to make students keep up. The goal is to do what's best for students and to make sure that it's helping them access learning. Now, here's where we got to be honest. AI becomes a problem the moment it shifts from supporting instruction to being the only sole instructor. And when that happens, we lose relationship, we lose professional judgment, context, and cultural responsiveness, and that is not it. So the takeaway isn't AI is the future of teaching. It's this. AI can remove invisible barriers if educators stay in that driver's seat. Okay? If it's used well, it can expand access, but if it's used poorly, it will only widen the gaps. Here's what stood out most to me at CES this year, and believe it or not, it wasn't another screen or another app, another AI dashboard. It was a quiet reminder that learning is physical. That's how students move, how they touch, how they build and interact with the material. That still matters. And in fact, it matters a lot. And honestly, this felt like a long overdue correction because there was a time not that long ago when we decided that the solution to learning challenges was to make students sit longer, make them be quieter, and make them stay still because that made sense. Some of y'all may remember this. Students parked in lead or star, sitting in rows, expected to focus for some extended amount of time with minimal movement, often without any real explanation of why that approach suddenly became this like trendy thing for them to do. And from a learning standpoint, it was extremely counterproductive. Not because students didn't care, not because they weren't capable, but because attention don't work that way. If that sounds familiar, it's because I talked about this in a previous episode. The episode was called Everything Feels Harder Than It Used to. And in that episode, we unpacked why long form tasks feel a lot heavier now. And not only for students, but for adults too. And it's not because people are less intelligent, but because sustained attention without interaction drains cognitive energy extremely fast. That same dynamic plays out in classrooms every single day. So seeing tools like Lego Smart Play, which embeds intelligence into physical learning, it felt refreshing because instead of forcing students to adapt to some type of like rigid learning structure, these tools help adapt to how students actually learn. Because we know that students learn by touching. They learn by moving, they learn by building and experimenting. And when we ignore that, what often gets labeled as some type of behavior that the student may have is really just cognitive overload. So to provide you an example, instead of asking a student to explain a math concept verbally or in writing, which can turn into an exhausting long form task, a hands-on tool allows them to build the concept, manipulate it, and demonstrate understanding without the attention becoming the barrier. And it's not lowering the expectation because they still have the same expectation, but it's designing for how attention actually works. And honestly, I'm glad we're seeing less of the sit still and endure it approach because learning was never meant to be static. And when used well, physical and those hybrid learning tools don't just increase engagement, but they make learning feel a lot more capable and like it's well within reach again. Now let's go ahead and talk about the thing that I know that that's been on everybody's mind, which is robotics. Because when I tell you that robotics showed up this year to CES, my goodness, I was just blown away. So some people may see robotics as innovation, and there's others that are like, okay, but where does this actually fit? And I'm here to tell you that robotics can actually support learning when used intentionally. Let me be crystal clear. When used intentionally, they work best when they support those hands-on STEM exploration. They're able to show that cause and effect clearly or motivate disengaged learners and provide some type of structure for some students. But robotics becomes a problem when it overstimulates or overwhelms students because it's adding another system that teachers must manage, or it could even widen the equity gap and become that lesson instead of supporting it. Classrooms don't need this novelty in the space. They need clarity, they need consistency, as well as purpose. Robotics belongs somewhere, but we have to be intentional in making sure that it's not everywhere. And always with educators making the call, technology should adapt to classrooms, not the other way around. I know it was only 3 things and it was extremely quick, but when you zoom out at everything and put it all on the table, one thing becomes very clear for me. This isn't about shiny tools. It's about the design choices that we're making when we're thinking about technology. And every tool should force the same question. Who is this built for? And what problem is it actually solving? And what I mean by that is AI can reduce barriers if it supports instruction. And same thing for hands-on tools. They can restore access if we stop confusing stillness with learning. And lastly, robotics can open doors if educators control when and why it's used. So the through line is very simple. Technology works when it respects how students actually learn, and it reduces the cognitive load and supports educators instead of sidelining. Anything else is just a whole bunch of noise, and educators don't need any more tools. They need better design, better questions, and they need to be at the table when the thing is being designed. So the next time you hear about the future of education, don't ask if the tech is impressive. Ask these questions. Does this make learning more accessible? Does this make teaching more sustainable? If the answer is no, it don't belong in the classroom, y'all. And you've been listening to Tech Evolution, part of the Education Evolution. I'm Jihad, Mr. Jihad. Our goal is to reach 600 YouTube subscribers by the end of this month. So if this episode resonated with you in any way, shape, or form, please like, subscribe, and share it with the masses because learning doesn't stop at school. It shows up in our work, our systems, and our everyday lives, whether we want to admit it or not. I'll catch you on the next one.